Millionaire forces assistant to go to his party, but her arrival leaves everyone speechless. The morning light filtered through the towering windows of Lancaster House, one of London's most prestigious corporate buildings, casting long shadows across Emma Bennett's desk. At 32, she had spent the last 5 years as personal assistant to Alexander Crawford, CEO of Crawford Industries and one of Britain's most notorious business tycoons. The relationship had always been strictly professional, though professional in Alexander's world often meant enduring his condescending remarks and thinly veiled superiority complex. Emma adjusted her simple black blazer and tucked a strand of auburn hair behind her ear as she organized the day's schedule. The office buzzed with the usual Monday morning energy, but something felt different. She could sense it in the way people glanced at her desk, in the whispered conversations that died down as she passed by. "Miss Bennett." Alexander's voice cut through her thoughts. He stood at his office door, impeccably dressed in a bespoke suit that probably cost more than her monthly salary. At 45, he possessed the kind of refined handsomeness that came with privilege and power, along with an arrogance that seemed to grow with each successful business deal. "Yes, Mr. Crawford," Emma responded, maintaining her usual professional demeanor, despite the slight tremor in her voice. "I'm hosting a gala this Saturday at Crawford Manor. All of London's elite will be there. Industrialists, politicians, aristocrats." He paused, his steel-grey eyes studying her with an unsettling intensity. "I'd like you to attend." Emma's fingers froze over her keyboard. In 5 years she had organized countless events for Alexander, but had never been invited to attend one. Something about his smile made her uneasy. "I appreciate the invitation, Mr. Crawford, but I don't think—" "This isn't a request, Miss Bennett. As my personal assistant, your presence is required. We'll be announcing several major company initiatives, and I need you there to handle any administrative details that might arise." His tone left no room for argument. As Alexander turned to leave, he added with a slight smirk, "Do try to find something appropriate to wear. We wouldn't want you to feel out of place among our distinguished guests." The condescension in his voice made Emma's cheeks burn. She knew what he really meant, that someone of her social standing could never truly belong in his world. As she watched him disappear into his office, her phone buzzed with a text message. "Long time no see, stranger. I'm back in London. Dinner tonight?" Emma's heart skipped a beat as she read the name, James Richardson. Images flooded her mind. Summers in Cambridge, study sessions that turned into deep conversations, a friendship that had meant everything until life pulled them in different directions. The last she'd heard, James had become a successful restaurateur, turning his passion for food into a thriving business empire that rivaled even Crawford Industries in certain sectors. She hesitated for just a moment before typing her reply, "Same old place at 7. His response came instantly. "Wouldn't miss it for the world." As Emma returned to her work, she couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was about to change. The weight of Alexander's invitation pressed against her chest, but somehow knowing she would see James that evening made it easier to bear. What she didn't know, couldn't know, was that both the invitation and James's return would set in motion a series of events that would transform not just her life, but the lives of everyone involved. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, London's skyline stretched out before her, a maze of ancient spires and modern glass towers. Somewhere in that urban landscape, old dreams and new possibilities were about to collide, and Emma Bennett, the quiet assistant who had always stayed in the background, was about to step into the spotlight in ways she never imagined. The copper kettle hadn't changed in the decades since Emma had last visited. The small cafe, tucked away in a quiet corner of Covent Garden, still maintained its charm with exposed brick walls and mismatched vintage furniture. As she pushed open the familiar wooden door, the smell of freshly baked scones and Earl Grey tea transported her back to her university days. James was already there, sitting at their old corner table. Time had been kind to him. His boyish features had matured into distinguished handsomeness, but his warm brown eyes still held that same mischievous glint she remembered. He stood as she approached, and without hesitation, pulled her into a tight embrace. "Emma Bennett," he said, his voice rich with affection. "Still hiding away in corporate towers, I see." She laughed, settling into the chair across from him. "And you're still trying to charm your way through life, James Richardson, though I hear you're doing quite well at it these days. You've been keeping tabs on me." His eyes twinkled as he signaled the waiter. It's hard not to when your restaurants keep making headlines. Britain's rising star chef takes London by storm. I believe that was last month's Sunday Times. James ran a hand through his dark hair, a gesture so familiar it made Emma's heart ache with nostalgia. All smoke and mirrors, really, though I suppose I can't complain. He paused, studying her face. But enough about me, tell me about you. How did you end up working for Alexander Crawford? Emma's smile faltered slightly. It was meant to be temporary, actually, just something to pay the bills while I figured out what I really wanted to do. But then 1 year turned into 5, and... She trailed off, absent-mindedly stirring her tea. And now you're trapped in the golden cage of Crawford Industries, James finished, his tone gentle but concerned. The Alexander Crawford I know isn't exactly famous for his warm personality. He's... Emma searched for a diplomatic way to describe her employer. Challenging. Speaking of which, he's hosting this gala at his manor this Saturday, and he's insisted I attend. James's eyebrows shot up. The notorious Crawford Manor Gala? I actually received an invitation myself. Something about celebrating British entrepreneurship? He leaned forward, his expression turning serious. Emma, why do I get the feeling you're not exactly thrilled about this invitation? She hesitated, then told him about the morning's interaction with Alexander, the subtle humiliation in his tone, the clear message that she didn't belong in his world. As she spoke, she noticed James's jaw tightening. Come with me, he said suddenly. What? To the gala. Be my +1. His eyes lit up with that familiar excitement she remembered from their university days, when he'd convince her to join one of his adventures. Look, I know Alexander Crawford's type. Men like him think they can define people by their bank accounts or their family names. Let's show him how wrong he is. Emma felt her pulse quicken. James, I couldn't possibly. Do you remember what you told me our first year at Cambridge, when I was convinced I'd never make it as a chef because I didn't come from a restaurant family? He reached across the table, taking her hand. You said, the only person who gets to decide your worth is you. The memory hit her with unexpected force. They had been sitting in this very cafe, James devastated after a particularly harsh criticism from his culinary instructor. She'd spent hours convincing him not to give up on his dreams. That advice changed my life, Emma. Maybe it's time you took it yourself. His thumb traced small circles on her palm, sending shivers up her arm. Let me help you show Crawford and his entire circle who Emma Bennett really is. As the evening light filtered through the cafe's windows, casting a golden glow across their table, Emma felt something shift inside her. Perhaps it was the warmth of James's hand in hers, or the memory of who she used to be, the girl who believed anything was possible. Okay, she said softly, then with more conviction. Okay, yes, I'll go with you. James's face broke into a brilliant smile. Perfect. Now, about your dress. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through his contacts. I know this brilliant designer who owes me a favor. Trust me. Emma looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not just the successful businessman he'd become, but also the passionate young man who'd spent countless hours sharing his dreams with her over cheap coffee and scones. Always, she replied. Neither of them noticed the other patrons in the cafe or the way the evening had slipped into night. They were too busy reconstructing the bridge between their past and present, unaware that their reunion was about to catalyze a sequence of events that would shake London's high society to its core. The rest of the week passed in a whirlwind of preparations. True to his word, James had arranged for Emma to meet with Sophia Chen, one of London's most sought-after fashion designers. The designer's studio, a converted loft in Shoreditch, was a far cry from Emma's usual haunts. James told me about the situation, Sophia said, circling Emma with an appraising eye. And, darling, we're going to make sure you outshine everyone at that party, not with flash but with pure elegance. As Sophia worked her magic, Emma caught glimpses of herself in the studio's mirrors, watching as a transformation began to take place. The designer had chosen a midnight blue silk gown that seemed to flow like water, its cut both sophisticated and understated. We're not trying to make you into someone else, Sophia explained, adjusting the fabric. We're just showing the world who you've always been. Meanwhile, back at Crawford Industries, Alexander was crafting his own plans. In his penthouse office, he sat with Victoria Blackwood, his head of PR and longtime confidant. "I don't understand why you're so fixated on humiliating your assistant," Victoria said, examining her perfectly manicured nails. "She seems competent enough." Alexander swirled the scotch in his crystal tumbler. "It's not about her competence, Victoria. It's about maintaining order. These people need to understand their place. When Bennett shows up at the gala, clearly out of her depth, it will serve as a reminder to everyone in the company about the natural hierarchy of things." What Alexander didn't know was that Emma's quiet efficiency at work masked a deep well of strength and grace. As the week progressed, subtle changes began to appear in her demeanor. She stood a little straighter, spoke with more conviction, and even began to handle Alexander's condescension with a slight smile that left him oddly unsettled. On Friday afternoon, James surprised Emma at her office with lunch. Much to the excitement of her colleagues, who had been whispering about the handsome restaurateur's frequent visits all week. "Everything's set for tomorrow," he said, spreading out an impressive array of dishes from his newest restaurant. "Car will pick you up at 7. Sophia will send someone to help with hair and makeup, and I've arranged for a little surprise at the gala." Emma raised an eyebrow. "James, what are you planning?" He grinned, that familiar sparkle in his eyes. "Let's just say I'm not the only one from our Cambridge days who's looking forward to seeing you again. Remember Sarah Matthews?" "Sarah? From the university newspaper?" Emma's eyes widened. "Don't tell me. She's now the features editor at the Times, and she's very interested in doing a piece on emerging business leaders who are changing the face of British industry, particularly those who are breaking down social barriers." Emma felt a mix of excitement and anxiety flutter in her stomach. "You're playing a dangerous game, James." He reached across the desk, taking her hand. "No game, just truth. It's time London society saw you for who you really are. Not just Crawford's assistant, but a woman of substance and grace." As they talked, neither noticed Alexander watching from his office, his expression darkening as he observed their easy intimacy. He picked up his phone, dialing a number. "Victoria, I need you to dig up everything you can on James Richardson. There's something about him I don't trust." The day of the gala dawned bright and clear. Emma stood in her flat watching the morning light paint patterns on her wall, thinking about how much had changed in just 1 week. Her phone buzzed with a message from James. "Ready to shake up the London elite?" She smiled, typing back, "Ready or not, here we come." As promised, Sophia's team arrived at her flat in the afternoon. Hours passed in a blur of expert hands and encouraging words. When they finally finished and Emma stood before her full-length mirror, she hardly recognized herself. The woman staring back at her exuded quiet confidence. The midnight blue gown hugged her curves perfectly before flowing elegantly to the floor. Her auburn hair was styled in soft waves, and her makeup enhanced her natural features while maintaining an air of sophistication. But it wasn't just the external transformation that struck her. There was something different in her eyes. A spark of the girl she used to be at Cambridge, the one who believed in possibilities and wasn't afraid to stand up for what she believed in. Her phone buzzed again. James was waiting downstairs. As Emma gathered her courage and headed for the door, she thought about Alexander's smirk when he'd invited her to the gala. He thought he was setting the stage for her humiliation, but instead, he might have inadvertently given her the perfect opportunity to reclaim her own narrative. Little did any of them know that the events of the coming evening would reshape not just Emma's future, but the very fabric of London's social hierarchy. As her heels clicked against the stairs, each step took her closer to a night that would change everything. Crawford Manor stood like a jewel against the twilight sky, its Victorian architecture illuminated by strategically placed spotlights that made the limestone facade glow. A stream of luxury vehicles deposited London's elite onto the red carpet that led to the grand entrance, where photographers eagerly captured each arrival for the society pages. Inside his study, Alexander Crawford adjusted his bow tie, watching the arrivals through the window. Victoria Blackwood appeared at his side, elegant in a crimson gown. "Your assistant hasn't arrived yet," she noted, checking her tablet, "though I must say the guest list is quite impressive. The Prime Minister's cabinet members, tech moguls, even that American venture capitalist you've been trying to court." Alexander's lips curved into a satisfied smile. "Perfect. The more prestigious the crowd, the more obvious her inadequacy will be. Did you find anything interesting about Richardson?" Nothing particularly scandalous, Victoria replied. Self-made success, innovative business approach, highly respected in the industry. Though there is one interesting detail. He and Emma Bennett were quite close during their Cambridge days. There are rumors they might have been more than friends. Alexander's expression hardened. Is that so? How so intriguing? Meanwhile, in the back of a sleek black Bentley, Emma sat beside James, her heart pounding. I'm not sure I can do this, she whispered, smoothing her gown for the 100th time. James took her hand, his touch steady and reassuring. Do you remember our final year at Cambridge, when you had to debate against that entitled student body president? Everyone thought you'd back down, but instead you delivered the most brilliant speech I'd ever heard. Emma smiled at the memory. He was so sure he'd win because his father was a member of Parliament. And you showed him that genuine intelligence and integrity trump privilege every time. James squeezed her hand. That's the Emma Bennett I know. That's who you're going to be tonight. The car pulled up to the entrance. Through the tinted windows, Emma could see the flashbulbs popping, hear the murmur of the crowd. James stepped out first, then turned to help her from the car. The moment Emma emerged, time seemed to slow. The midnight blue silk caught the light, making it appear as though she was wrapped in starlight. Her presence was magnetic, not because she was trying to draw attention, but because she carried herself with an innate grace that commanded respect. The photographers, who had been preparing to lower their cameras, suddenly raised them again. Here was something unexpected. James Richardson, the rising star of British cuisine, with a woman who looked like she had stepped out of a classical painting. As they walked the carpet, James's hand resting lightly on the small of her back, Emma felt rather than saw the ripple of recognition pass through the crowd. She caught snippets of whispered conversations. Is that Crawford's assistant? I had no idea she was Richardson's date. But I thought, inside the Manor's grand ballroom, Alexander was making his rounds when the whispers reached him. He turned toward the entrance just as Emma and James made their appearance at the top of the marble staircase. For a moment, he forgot to breathe. This couldn't be his assistant. This elegant woman who drew every eye in the room. The Emma Bennett he knew faded into the background, but this version of her seemed to enhance the very atmosphere around her. Sarah Matthews, the Times editor, materialized at their side almost immediately. Emma Bennett, she said warmly, embracing her old friend. You look absolutely stunning. James mentioned you might be here tonight. I'd love to chat about your journey from Cambridge to Crawford Industries. Before Emma could respond, more guests gravitated toward them. A tech CEO who had repeatedly ignored Emma during meetings now asked for her opinion on market trends. The American venture capitalist James mentioned earlier engaged her in a lengthy discussion about innovative business models. From across the room, Victoria appeared at Alexander's side. This isn't going according to plan, she murmured. Alexander gripped his champagne glass so tightly his knuckles whitened. Who else did Richardson invite? Half of London's media elite, it seems. Sarah Matthews from The Times, editors from the Financial Times and The Guardian. They're all here and they're all fascinated by your assistant. The evening had barely begun, but already Alexander could see his carefully constructed narrative crumbling. Emma wasn't just surviving in his world, she was thriving. And James Richardson, the way he looked at her, with a mixture of pride and something deeper, more personal, made Alexander's blood boil. As the orchestra struck up a waltz, James led Emma onto the dance floor. They moved together with the easy grace of long familiarity, and Emma's laugh floated across the ballroom like music. Ready for the next phase? James whispered in her ear as they danced. Emma looked up at him, seeing the same mischievous glint she remembered from their university days. What exactly do you have planned? His smile was enigmatic. Let's just say the evening is about to become even more interesting. Trust me? As they twirled across the floor, Emma felt a lifetime of doubt and insecurity falling away. She was no longer the invisible assistant, the girl who didn't belong. Tonight she was simply herself, and somehow that was turning out to be more than enough. The Crawford Manor ballroom sparkled with crystal chandeliers and animated conversation, but all eyes continued to drift toward Emma and James as they moved through the crowd with natural ease. The whispers had evolved from initial shock to genuine intrigue, as Emma's intelligence and charm became impossible to ignore. Lady Margaret Winters, a formidable force in British society and a key investor in Crawford Industries, cornered Emma near the champagne fountain. "My dear, James has been telling me about your ideas regarding corporate social responsibility. I must say I find your perspective quite refreshing." Emma felt James's supportive presence beside her as she elaborated on her vision. "I believe businesses have an obligation to contribute meaningfully to society, beyond just profitable margins. It's about creating sustainable impact." "Precisely what I've been saying for years," Lady Margaret agreed, her eyes twinkling. "Alexander tends to focus solely on the bottom line, but there's so much more to building a lasting legacy. Tell me, have you considered taking on a more substantial role in the industry?" From across the room, Alexander watched the exchange with growing unease. His plan to humble Emma had backfired spectacularly. Instead of shrinking under the spotlight, she was blooming, revealing layers of sophistication and insight that he had either never noticed or deliberately ignored. Victoria approached him with fresh intelligence. "It gets worse," she murmured. "Richardson isn't just here as Emma's date. He's announcing a major new business initiative tonight, something that could directly compete with our upcoming projects." Alexander's jaw tightened. "What kind of initiative?" "A chain of upscale restaurants combined with culinary education centers specifically designed to provide training and opportunities for underprivileged youth. He's already secured backing from several people in this room, including some of our investors." The implications hit Alexander like a physical blow. This was exactly the kind of socially conscious project he had dismissed as unprofitable, despite Emma's attempts to propose similar initiatives over the years. Meanwhile, Emma found herself in an animated discussion with Claire Montgomery, head of a major tech startup. "The way you handled the Wilson account restructuring was brilliant," Claire commented. "We'd been following that case study at my firm. The human-centered approach you implemented while maintaining profitability, that's exactly the kind of thinking we need more of." Emma blinked in surprise. "You know about that?" "Of course. It's become quite the talking point in corporate circles. Though I'm surprised Crawford gave you credit for it publicly, given his usual style." Before Emma could respond, James appeared at her side. "Sorry to interrupt, but would you mind if I borrowed Emma for a moment?" He led her out onto the terrace where the London night spread out before them like a carpet of stars. The spring air was cool and fresh after the warmth of the ballroom. "You're amazing," he said softly. "Do you realize every person in that room is seeing what I've always seen in you?" Emma felt a blush creep up her cheeks. "It's all happening so fast. Lady Margaret practically offered me a job and Claire Montgomery knew about my work. I never thought—" "That's because Crawford made sure you didn't know your own worth." James turned to face her fully. "Emma, there's something I need to tell you. Something I've been planning for months ever since I heard about how Crawford was treating you and others at the company." Emma saw the serious look in his eyes. "James, what have you done?" "I'm launching a new venture. Not just restaurants, but a whole new approach to corporate responsibility in the hospitality industry. Education centers, training programs, sustainable supply chains. Everything you and I used to talk about back at Cambridge." Her heart skipped a beat. "The dream project. Yes. And I want you to be part of it. Not as an assistant, but as a full partner. Your experience, your insight, your compassion, they're exactly what this project needs." Before Emma could process this revelation, they heard the orchestra beginning a new piece inside. James's expression softened into something more playful. "But first, we have a few more surprises planned for this evening. Shall we?" He offered his arm. As they returned to the ballroom, Emma caught sight of Alexander watching them, his expression dark. For the first time, she didn't feel intimidated by his disapproval. Instead, she felt something entirely new. Pity. He had tried to orchestrate her humiliation, but had instead given her the perfect stage to shine. The night was far from over, and as James led her back onto the dance floor, Emma could sense that the biggest surprises were yet to come. The power dynamics in the room had shifted, and everyone could feel it. This was no longer about an assistant trying to fit into her employer's world. This was about a woman coming into her own power, surrounded by people who finally recognized her true value. Lady Margaret's knowing smile, Claire Montgomery's thoughtful gaze, and the continuous buzz of conversation around them all pointed to one undeniable fact. The evening that was meant to be Emma's social downfall had become her triumphant rise instead. The evening had reached that golden hour when formalities began to soften and true intentions emerged from behind social masks. The orchestra had just finished a sweeping waltz when the subtle chime of crystal rang through the ballroom. James Richardson stood at the top of the grand staircase, champagne flute in hand, commanding attention without raising his voice. "Distinguished guests, if I could have your attention for a moment," his voice carried across the now hushed room. "Tonight isn't just about celebrating British entrepreneurship. It's about reimagining what it means to be successful in today's world." Emma watched from her position near the center of the room, feeling the air grow thick with anticipation. Alexander Crawford had moved closer to the staircase, his expression unreadable. "For too long," James continued, "we've measured success purely in terms of profit margins and market share. But true leadership requires more than just financial acumen. It requires vision, compassion, and the courage to challenge established norms." He gestured to the gathering of Britain's elite. "Look around this room. That's why I'm proud to announce the launch of Horizon Hospitality Group, a new venture that will revolutionize not just the restaurant industry, but the very way we think about corporate responsibility." The crowd murmured with interest as James outlined his vision. A network of high-end restaurants coupled with culinary education centers, sustainable farming partnerships, and career development programs for underprivileged youth. We have the power to reshape industries, to create opportunities, to lift people up rather than hold them down. "But this initiative isn't just my vision," James said, his eyes finding Emma in the crowd. "It's been shaped by conversations with remarkable individuals who understand that true excellence comes from nurturing talent wherever we find it. People who know that the best leaders aren't those who demand subservience, but those who inspire growth." Alexander's knuckles whitened around his champagne glass as he recognized the subtle rebuke in James's words. Victoria touched his arm in warning, but he shrugged her off. "That's why I'm particularly excited to announce our first board member and partner," James continued, extending his hand toward Emma. "Someone whose brilliant mind and compassionate leadership have been quietly shaping successful strategies behind the scenes for years. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Emma Bennett." The spotlight found Emma, and for a moment she felt her heart stop. But then she saw the pride in James's eyes, felt the encouraging squeezes on her arm from Lady Margaret and Claire Montgomery, and drew herself up to her full height. The midnight blue gown caught the light as she made her way to the stairs, each step measured and graceful. "This is outrageous," Alexander's voice cut through the applause. "Miss Bennett is under contract with Crawford Industries." "She can't possibly—" "Actually," Sarah Matthews stepped forward, reporter's instinct gleaming in her eyes, "I believe British labour law is quite clear about non-compete clauses being unenforceable when they prevent an employee's professional growth, especially given the documented history of workplace dynamics at Crawford Industries." The implications of her words hung in the air. Several board members shifted uncomfortably, well aware of the press presence in the room. Emma reached James's side, and he took her hand, squeezing it gently. "Emma has demonstrated time and again that she possesses exactly the kind of innovative thinking and ethical leadership that the business world desperately needs. I can think of no one better to help shape this new venture." Looking out over the gathered crowd, Emma saw not the intimidating social elite she'd feared, but a room full of people nodding in approval. Lady Margaret raised her glass in a subtle salute, while Claire Montgomery was already making her way toward the stairs, clearly eager to discuss potential tech partnerships. "If I may," Emma said, her voice clear and steady, "I believe that true success lies in creating opportunities for others to succeed. Every person in this room started somewhere. The question is, are we pulling up the ladder behind us, or are we extending a hand to those who come after?" The metaphor wasn't lost on anyone, least of all Alexander, who stood rigid with barely contained fury. His carefully constructed world of social hierarchies was crumbling before his eyes, and his former assistant was helping to dismantle it. But the tide of the evening had turned decisively. As conversation resumed, and guests clustered around James and Emma to learn more about Horizon Hospitality Group, it became clear that this was more than just a business announcement. It was a declaration of a new way of thinking about power, privilege, and possibility. James's hand remained steady on the small of Emma's back, a silent reminder that this was just the beginning. The night still held more surprises, and as Emma caught his eye, she saw a flicker of that familiar mischievous spark that told her he wasn't done yet. The game had changed, the pieces were in motion, and the story of Emma Bennett was being rewritten before London's very eyes. In the wake of James's announcement, the grand ballroom had transformed into a buzzing hive of excitement and speculation. Emma found herself at the center of a whirlwind of congratulations and business cards, while Alexander Crawford had retreated to a corner, engaged in intense conversation with his legal team. "You knew about this all along, didn't you?" Victoria accused, appearing at Alexander's side with a fresh glass of scotch. "That's why you invited her tonight. You thought you could humiliate her before she had the chance to resign." Alexander's silence was answer enough. He watched as Emma gracefully navigated through conversations with potential investors, her confidence growing with each interaction. The woman before him bore little resemblance to the quiet assistant he'd thought he knew so well. Meanwhile, in a quiet alcove near the conservatory, James had pulled Emma aside for a moment of respite. The soft glow from the garden lights filtered through the stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns across their faces. "Are you overwhelmed?" he asked softly, noting the slight tremor in her hands as she adjusted her bracelet. Emma let out a shaky laugh. "Completely. But in the best possible way." She looked up at him, her eyes shining. "James, I can't believe you did all this. The venture, the partnerships, everything we used to dream about at university." "I meant what I said earlier," he replied, reaching out to tuck a stray curl behind her ear. "This isn't just my vision, it's ours, it always has been. Do you remember those late-night conversations in the Cambridge coffee shop? You'd get so passionate about creating ethical business models that you'd completely forget about your cold tea." The memory brought a warm smile to Emma's face. "And you'd sketch restaurant layouts on napkins, planning how to make fine dining more accessible to everyone. We were quite a pair, weren't we?" James's voice had grown softer, more intimate. "I've often wondered why we never—" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with years of unspoken feelings. Before Emma could respond, they were interrupted by Lady Margaret. "There you are, my dears. Emma, you simply must meet Sir Richard from the Education Board. He's fascinated by your ideas about apprenticeship programs." As Emma was whisked away, she caught a glimpse of James's expression, a mixture of frustration and determination that made her heart flutter. Whatever he had been about to say, she sensed it wasn't finished. The evening continued to unfold like a dream. Emma found herself in deep discussions about educational reform, sustainable business practices, and corporate responsibility. Each conversation reinforced what she had always known but had somehow forgotten, that her ideas had value, that her voice deserved to be heard. Across the room, Alexander watched as his carefully constructed plans crumbled. He had intended to showcase Emma's inadequacies. Instead, he had provided the perfect stage for her triumph. The irony was not lost on him. "Mr. Crawford," a smooth voice interrupted his brooding. It was Claire Montgomery, the tech executive. "I couldn't help but notice that you seem surprised by Miss Bennett's capabilities. Perhaps if you'd spent more time nurturing talent rather than suppressing it, you wouldn't be losing one of your most valuable assets." Before Alexander could formulate a suitably cutting response, the orchestra began playing a familiar melody, the same waltz that had been playing the first time James and Emma had danced together at a Cambridge formal. James appeared at Emma's side as if by magic, extending his hand. "May I have this dance?" As they moved across the floor, the rest of the room seemed to fade away. Emma was acutely aware of James's hand on her waist, the warmth of his touch through the silk of her gown. "Do you remember the last time we danced to this?" he asked, guiding her through a turn. "The Winter Ball final year," Emma replied softly. "You had just won the culinary competition, and I had just been offered the internship at Crawford Industries," James finished. "I wanted to tell you something that night, but I lost my nerve. I convinced myself that you needed to focus on your career, that I needed to prove myself first." Emma's heart began to race. "James, I've spent the last 10 years building restaurants, earning accolades, becoming the person I thought I needed to be." His voice was barely above a whisper now. "But seeing you tonight, watching you shine the way I always knew you could, Emma Ton, I realize I've been waiting for the perfect moment when the perfect moment has been right in front of me all along." The music swelled around them, and Emma could feel the eyes of the other guests on them, but in that moment, nothing else mattered. The years of separation, of missed opportunities and unspoken feelings seemed to collapse into this single perfect moment. James's next words would change everything, but neither of them knew just how much. As the waltz drew to a close, the air between them crackled with possibility, and the grand ballroom of Crawford Manor held its breath, waiting for what would come next. The final notes of the waltz hung in the air like suspended crystals. James held Emma's gaze, and in that moment, something shifted in the atmosphere of the grand ballroom. The gathered elite of London society seemed to collectively hold their breath, sensing that they were about to witness something extraordinary. "Emma," James began, his voice carrying clearly across the now silent room, 10 years ago, I made the biggest mistake of my life. I let you walk away because I thought we both needed to prove ourselves to the world first." He took both her hands in his, and Emma felt the slight tremor in his fingers that belied his calm exterior. The spotlight that had followed them during their dance now seemed to create a private universe just for them, though hundreds of eyes watched intently. "But the truth is," he continued, "everything I've achieved, every restaurant I've opened, every success I've had, they've all felt incomplete because you weren't there to share them. Not just as a friend or a business partner, but as the extraordinary woman who has held my heart since our days at Cambridge." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd as James slowly lowered himself to one knee, still holding Emma's hands. From his pocket, he produced a vintage ring that Emma instantly recognized. It was the same style as the one they had once admired together in an antique shop window during their student days. "You were the first person who believed in my dreams," James said, his voice thick with emotion. "You gave me the courage to pursue them, to believe in myself. And now, after all these years, I finally understand that success means nothing without love. Real, profound, enduring love." Emma felt tears welling in her eyes as James continued, "You once told me that the only person who gets to decide your worth is you. Tonight you've shown everyone exactly who you are, brilliant, compassionate, and absolutely extraordinary. But I've known these truths about you all along, and I want to spend the rest of my life reminding you of them." From across the room, Alexander Crawford watched the scene unfold with an unexpected tightness in his chest. Something about Emma's transformation and James's words was forcing him to confront uncomfortable truths about himself and his treatment of others. "Emma Bennett," James's voice rang out clear and strong. "Will you marry me? Will you partner with me not just in business, but in life? Will you let me spend every day showing you that love and success aren't mutually exclusive, but are most beautiful when they're shared?" The silence in the room was absolute. The silence. Emma looked down at James, seeing not just the successful businessman he'd become, but also the passionate young man who had shared his dreams with her over countless cups of coffee. She saw their past, their present, and a future full of possibilities. "Yes," she whispered, then louder with joy breaking through her voice, "Yes, absolutely yes." The ballroom erupted in applause as James slipped the ring onto her finger and stood, pulling her into a kiss that spoke of years of waiting and promises of forever. Lady Margaret dabbed at her eyes with a silk handkerchief, while Claire Montgomery began typing rapidly on her phone, no doubt ensuring this moment would make tomorrow's social media headlines. Sarah Matthews appeared at the couple's side, her journalist's instincts perfectly attuned to the moment. "The ultimate success story," she said warmly. "Two brilliant minds who found their way back to each other while breaking down social barriers and redefining corporate culture. This is exactly the kind of story Britain needs right now." As congratulations poured in from all sides, Emma caught sight of Alexander standing alone near one of the tall windows. For the first time that evening, his carefully maintained mask of superiority had cracked, revealing something that looked remarkably like regret. Victoria approached him cautiously. "Alexander, are you all right?" He took a long moment to respond, his eyes fixed on the happy couple. "I've been wrong about so many things, Victoria. So terribly wrong." The evening had transformed into something none of them had expected. What had begun as an attempt at humiliation had become a celebration of love, redemption, and the breaking down of social barriers. As Emma and James received the good wishes of London's elite, it was clear that this was more than just a proposal. It was the beginning of a new chapter in both their personal and professional lives. The night was far from over, and as the orchestra struck up another piece, the air was thick with the sense that more surprises were yet to come. The story of Emma Bennett and James Richardson was becoming legend even as it unfolded, a testament to the power of true love and the importance of seeing people for who they really are, not who society says they should be. As the evening progressed, Crawford Manor seemed to pulse with a new energy. The engagement announcement had transformed the atmosphere from one of formal sophistication to genuine celebration. Yet amid the joy and congratulations, subtle but significant shifts were taking place in the dynamics of power and perception. Alexander Crawford stood in his private study, a glass of untouched scotch in his hand, watching the festivities through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The room that had always been his sanctuary, filled with symbols of his success, industry awards, photographs with dignitaries, rare first editions, suddenly felt hollow. Victoria entered without knocking, a privilege earned through years of friendship. "The press is having a field day," she said, showing him her tablet. "Social media is already calling it the Cinderella story of modern Britain, though I suspect Emma wouldn't appreciate that particular comparison." "She never needed a fairy godmother, did she?" Alexander mused, more to himself than to Victoria. "She had everything she needed all along. I just refused to see it." Back in the ballroom, Emma and James were surrounded by well-wishers, each conversation opening new doors of possibility. Claire Montgomery was particularly enthusiastic about potential collaborations. "Your vision for ethical business practices, combined with James's innovative approach to hospitality, it's exactly what the industry needs," Claire said, her eyes bright with excitement. "My tech firm would be very interested in developing digital solutions for your training programs." Lady Margaret joined them, linking her arm through Emma's. "My dear, you've managed to accomplish something remarkable tonight. You've reminded us all that true nobility isn't about birth or wealth. It's about character." James beamed with pride, but his eyes kept drifting to the study where Alexander had retreated. "Perhaps," he said carefully, "someone should extend an olive branch." Emma followed his gaze, understanding immediately what he meant. Throughout the evening, she had caught glimpses of something changing in Alexander's demeanor. The way his usual mask of superiority had cracked, revealing glimpses of genuine emotion underneath. "You're right," she said, squeezing James's hand. "Triumph without compassion is just another form of arrogance." With graceful determination, Emma made her way through the crowd toward Alexander's study. She paused at the door, smoothing her gown, no longer out of nervousness, but out of respect for the moment's importance. She knocked softly and entered to find Alexander staring out the window, Victoria hovering uncertainly nearby. "Mr. Crawford." He turned, and Emma was struck by how different he looked. Not smaller exactly, but more human. "Miss Bennett, or should I say, the future Mrs. Richardson." There was no malice in his tone, only a kind of tired resignation. "I wanted to thank you," Emma said, surprising both Alexander and herself. "Thank me?" He let out a short, incredulous laugh. "For what?" "For years of condescension. For trying to humiliate you tonight. For giving me the opportunity to prove something to myself." Emma moved further into the room, her confidence evident in every step. "I spent years believing I needed your approval, or the approval of people like you, to validate my worth. But tonight helped me realize that the only validation I ever needed was my own." Alexander was silent for a long moment, studying the woman who had once been his quiet, efficient assistant. "You know," he finally said, "I prided myself on being an excellent judge of character. Yet I completely misjudged the strongest character in my own office." Victoria's eyebrows shot up at this admission, but Emma maintained her composure. "It's never too late to change our perspectives," she said gently. "James and I are building something new, a business model that values people as much as profits. We could use someone with your experience and connections. As an advisor, perhaps?" The offer hung in the air between them. Alexander looked at Emma with new eyes, seeing not the assistant he had tried to diminish, but a woman offering him a chance at redemption. Before he could respond, James appeared in the doorway. "Everything all right?" he asked, his protective instincts evident. Emma turned to him with a warm smile. "Yes, actually. Mr. Crawford and I were just discussing the future." "The future," Alexander repeated, as if testing the word. "You know, I've spent my entire career looking backwards, protecting old money, maintaining traditional hierarchies. Perhaps it's time for a new perspective. The moment was interrupted by the sound of clinking crystal from the ballroom. Someone was calling for attention. Sarah Matthews's voice carried through the doors. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have everyone's attention, the Times would like to make a special announcement regarding our upcoming feature on Britain's new business visionaries." James extended his hand to Emma. "Shall we?" As they turned to leave, Alexander called out, "Miss Bennet, Emma." They paused at the threshold. "Your offer? I'd like to discuss it further, perhaps over dinner next week." Emma nodded, a gentle smile playing at her lips. "I know just the restaurant." The trio returned to the ballroom, where the night's surprises were far from over. The story of Emma Bennet was still being written, but now it was clear that its impact would reach far beyond one evening, one engagement, or one business venture. It was becoming a story of transformation, not just for Emma and James, but for everyone touched by their vision of a world where success and compassion could walk hand in hand. 3 months after the memorable night at Crawford Manor, the landscape of London's business world had shifted dramatically. The headquarters of Horizon Hospitality Group occupied a beautifully restored Victorian building in Covent Garden, its glass and brick architecture symbolizing the perfect blend of tradition and innovation that Emma and James had envisioned. Emma stood at the window of her new office, watching the morning bustle of the street below. The Times article framed on her wall had become something of a legend in business circles. The night that changed British business, how love and innovation transformed an industry. Sarah Matthews had outdone herself, crafting a narrative that captured not just the romance of the evening, but its broader implications for corporate culture. "Having second thoughts about the restaurant design?" James's voice came from the doorway, accompanied by the aroma of freshly brewed coffee from their own in-house cafe, naturally. Emma turned with a smile, accepting the cup he offered. "Just the opposite. I think Alexander's suggestions about the apprenticeship program actually improve our original plan." The transformation in Alexander Crawford over the past months had surprised everyone, none more than Alexander himself. After that first dinner meeting, he had thrown himself into his advisory role with unexpected enthusiasm, particularly in areas involving employee development and social responsibility. "Speaking of Alexander," James said, settling into one of the comfortable chairs they'd selected for the office, "have you seen this morning's Financial Times?" He handed Emma a tablet displaying the headline, "Crawford Industries announces revolutionary employee equity program." The article detailed Alexander's new initiative to give employees at all levels stakes in the company's success, with additional support for education and career development. "He's really doing it," Emma marveled. "Everything we talked about that night." "You inspired him," James said simply. "You inspired a lot of people." The evidence was all around them. Their first restaurant had opened the previous week to rave reviews, not just for its cuisine but for its integrated training program. Young people from disadvantaged backgrounds worked alongside seasoned professionals, learning not just culinary skills, but business management as well. Lady Margaret had become one of their most ardent supporters, using her influence to open doors that might have remained closed to a more traditional business model. Claire Montgomery's tech firm had developed a revolutionary app for their training program, making education more accessible than ever. "Have you finished the speech for tonight's opening ceremony?" James asked, moving to stand behind Emma and massaging her shoulders gently. Emma leaned back into his touch. "Almost. Though I'm still not sure about addressing the Royal Committee for Business Innovation. 6 months ago, I was just an assistant, and now you're exactly where you should be," James finished, "being recognized for exactly who you are." The sound of excited voices from the corridor interrupted them. Victoria Blackwood, who had surprised everyone by accepting a position as their PR director, burst into the office, her usual composure slightly ruffled. "You need to see this," she announced, brandishing her phone. "The waiting list for our apprenticeship program has exploded. We've got endorsements from 3 more major corporations and—" She paused for dramatic effect. "The Palace is interested in making it a national initiative." Emma and James exchanged glances. What had started as a dream sketched on cafe napkins at Cambridge was evolving into something far bigger than either of them had imagined. "Oh, and Emma," Victoria added with a knowing smile, "that wedding planning committee you've been avoiding? Lady Margaret is downstairs with the caterer, 3 different florists, and what appears to be half of London's fashion elite." Emma groaned playfully, but her eyes sparkled. The wedding plans had taken on a life of their own, with London society determined to make it the event of the season. Yet somehow, amid all the chaos of launching their business and planning their future, she and James had managed to keep the core of their relationship exactly as it had always been, built on mutual respect, shared dreams, and genuine love. "Tell them I'll be down in a moment," Emma said, turning back to James once Victoria had left. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Alexander hadn't invited me to that party?" James pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I would have found you anyway. Some things are just meant to be." As they stood together, looking out over the London streets where their story had begun, the future stretched before them full of possibility. The night that was meant to humiliate had instead initiated a wave of change that continued to ripple through British society, proving that sometimes the greatest transformations come from the most unexpected moments. The sound of more voices in the corridor reminded them that the day ahead was full of meetings, decisions, and preparations for the evening's ceremony. But for just a moment longer, they remained still, holding each other and marveling at how life's greatest challenges often lead to its greatest gifts. The Royal Committee for Business Innovation's annual ceremony was held in the historic Guildhall, its medieval architecture a striking contrast to the forward-thinking initiatives being celebrated. The Great Hall was filled with Britain's most influential business leaders, politicians, and social innovators, all gathered to witness what many were calling a revolutionary moment in corporate culture. Emma stood backstage, smoothing her emerald green evening gown. Another Sophia Chen creation, though this time chosen from a position of confidence rather than transformation. James appeared beside her, handsome in his tuxedo, his eyes shining with pride. "Ready to change the world?" he whispered, taking her hand. "Again?" Emma replied with a playful smile. "I thought we did that already." Their moment of levity was interrupted by Alexander Crawford's arrival. Gone was the imperious businessman of 6 months ago. In his place stood a man who had learned valuable lessons about humanity and humility. "Emma, James," he greeted them warmly. "I've just been speaking with the Chancellor of the Exchequer. He's extremely interested in implementing your training program model across other industries." Before Emma could respond, Lady Margaret appeared, elegant as ever in midnight blue. "My dears, you won't believe who I've just spotted in the audience. That American venture capitalist from the gala. He's flown in specifically for tonight's announcement." The announcements in question went far beyond the usual business awards. Tonight would mark the official launch of the National Initiative for Corporate Social Integration, a groundbreaking program that would transform the way British businesses approached social responsibility and employee development. Sarah Matthews materialized with her ever-present notebook. "The story has gone global," she informed them. "The Times is getting requests for follow-up features from publications worldwide. Everyone wants to know how a single evening at Crawford Manor sparked such widespread change." "It wasn't just one evening," Emma said thoughtfully. "It was every moment that led up to it, every time someone chose kindness over cruelty, progress over tradition, love over fear." Victoria appeared, clipboard in hand. 2 minutes until you're on, Emma. The Prime Minister just arrived, and the BBC cameras are in position." James squeezed Emma's hand. "Remember the first time you had to speak in public? That debate at Cambridge. When you told me to imagine the audience was just you sitting in our favorite cafe." Emma smiled at the memory. "Still works, doesn't it?" The stage manager signaled that it was time. As Emma stepped toward the curtain, she felt a gentle touch on her arm. It was Alexander. "I never properly apologized," he said quietly. "For all those years of perhaps some things don't need apologies," Emma interrupted gently. "Just change." The spotlight beckoned, and Emma walked onto the stage with the confidence of someone who knew exactly who she was and what she stood for. The applause was thunderous, but she barely heard it. Instead, she saw the faces of those who had been part of this journey. James beaming with love and pride. Alexander, finally understanding the true meaning of success. Lady Margaret, who had recognized potential where others saw only class barriers. As Emma began her speech, her voice clear and strong, she told a story not just of personal triumph, but of collective transformation. She spoke of dreams sketched on cafe napkins, of prejudices overcome, of love that transcended social boundaries. But most importantly, she spoke of the future, a future where success would be measured not just in profits, but in positive impact on human lives. The standing ovation that followed wasn't just for her words, it was for the change they represented. As James joined her on stage, followed by Alexander and other key supporters of the initiative, Emma realized that their story had become something larger than themselves. It had become a catalyst for change, a reminder that the greatest transformations often begin with a single act of courage. The evening was far from over, and as cameras flashed and reporters clamored for interviews, the air was thick with the sense that this was not an ending, but a beginning. The revolution in British business culture that had started with a planned humiliation at a grand manor was now spreading across industries, across borders, across generations. And at the heart of it all stood Emma and James, their fingers intertwined, their dreams no longer sketched on napkins, but being built in reality, brick by brick, life by life, change by change. 1 year to the day after that fateful gala at Crawford Manor, the Copper Kettle Cafe was transformed for a private celebration. The exposed brick walls were adorned with twinkling lights, and the mismatched vintage furniture had been arranged to accommodate an intimate gathering of those who had been part of this remarkable journey. Emma and James stood before their closest friends, not as business partners or social revolutionaries, but as two people deeply in love. The wedding they'd planned wasn't the grand society affair everyone had expected. Instead, they'd chosen to return to where their story truly began, the small cafe where they'd first shared their dreams as university students. It had to be here, Emma had insisted when they were planning the wedding. This is where we first believed in ourselves. The guest list was small but significant. Lady Margaret, who had become more of a mother figure than a mentor, Claire Montgomery, whose tech solutions had helped thousands of apprentices, Sarah Matthews, who had told their story to the world, Victoria, who had become one of their closest friends, and Alexander Crawford, whose own transformation had perhaps been the most profound of all. As James stood before their gathered loved ones, his eyes never left Emma's face. 10 years ago, in this very cafe, I watched you convince me that my dreams were valid, that my background didn't determine my future. What I didn't tell you then was that I was already falling in love with you, not just with your kindness or your intelligence, but with your ability to see the best in everyone, even when they couldn't see it themselves. Emma, radiant in a simple white dress that managed to outshine any ball gown, squeezed his hands as he continued. We've achieved so much this past year. The successful restaurants, the training programs, the national initiative. But standing here today, I realize that our greatest achievement isn't measured in business success or social impact. It's in the love we've created, the lives we've touched, and the barriers we've broken down. Alexander stepped forward to perform his role in the ceremony, one he'd requested himself, much to everyone's surprise. "A year ago," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "I thought I understood power. I thought I understood success. Thanks to these two remarkable people, I learned that true power lies not in pushing others down, but in lifting them up." The ceremony proceeded with heartfelt vows and joyful tears. When it came time for the celebrations, the cafe was filled with laughter and stories. Lady Margaret regaled everyone with tales of boardroom battles won through compassion rather than force. Claire shared updates about their latest tech innovations for social good. Sarah proudly displayed her award-winning series about the changing face of British business. Victoria, who had found her own voice in advocating for corporate responsibility, raised her glass in a toast. To Emma and James, who proved that sometimes the greatest business innovation is simply remembering our humanity. As the evening progressed, Emma and James snuck away to their old corner table. The surface still bore the faint marks of countless cups of tea and sketched dreams from their university days. "Do you remember sitting here planning our future?" Emma asked, tracing the worn wood with her finger. "Vaguely," James teased. "I believe someone was insisting that fine dining could be both excellent and accessible, and someone else was drawing restaurant layouts on napkins," Emma laughed. They looked out at their gathered friends, no longer divided by social class or corporate hierarchy, but united in their vision for a better future. Through the window, they could see the lights of their newest restaurant, where tomorrow another group of apprentices would begin their journey. "We did it," Emma said softly. "All those dreams we had, we actually did it. "We're just getting started," James replied, pulling her close. "There are still so many barriers to break, so many lives to change." "Together?" Emma asked, though she already knew the answer. "Always," James replied, sealing the promise with a kiss. As their friends called them back to the celebrations, Emma took one last look around the cafe. From Alexander deep in conversation with a group of apprentices, to Lady Margaret planning new initiatives with Claire, to Victoria and Sarah documenting it all for future generations, every person in this room represented a thread in the tapestry of change they'd woven together. The night that was meant to humiliate had instead illuminated a path forward, not just for Emma and James, but for an entire society ready to embrace a new way of thinking about success, power, and love. Their story had come full circle, ending where it began, in a small cafe where dreams were first sketched on napkins and hearts first recognized their matching rhythms. But of course it wasn't really an ending at all. It was, as all the best stories are, just the beginning of an even greater adventure.